Walking away from conflict does not mean you've overcome or resolved anything. All you did was create an environment for something destructive to grow. Hi everyone, I'm Jody Kolbee and welcome to another session of What's Your Story? Now, there are lots of people who often come to me and say, how is it that you handle challenges and conflict so well, especially when it comes to difficult people? And to be perfectly honest, it's not that I'm good at managing people. I'm just really good at listening, dissecting, and coming up with solutions. That's all. Over years and years, I've learned how to manage my challenges, not people. And yes, sometimes people are the challenge. And every now and then, you'll come across difficult people. But have you ever asked them why they're difficult? Have you really paid attention and listened? Or have you just written them and their issues off as difficult? How exactly do you manage conflict? Now, there are a lot of people, I know quite a few of them, who avoid conflict like the plague. I'm telling you, they see conflict and they run the other way. But the concern then is that you end up with less growth, less clarity, less understanding, which makes it harder for people to also relate to you and identify what makes you tick. And what this means is that you as a brand become unidentifiable, and nobody invests in something they cannot identify and understand. No one's going to invest in you. So you stunt your own growth. And come on, it's 2020 and we're not here for that. Not at all. Then there are people who handle it in an aggressive, non approachable way, which only makes the situation worse. Or you end up robbing someone else of an opportunity to negotiate and to grow. And additionally, what ends up happening is that you're so busy shouting down the other person that you rob yourself of an opportunity to learn from someone else, about someone else, and what the real root of the problem is, and how the other person's mind is programmed. So basically, nobody wins, even though you think you did. So, how should conflict be handled? Well, like everything else, and like most solutions that I've applied to my business, my brand, and just the way I go through life, there's a recipe for resolving conflict. And if you want to manage conflict and people, all you need are four things, okay? Read, respond, reevaluate, resolve. I'll say it again. Read, respond, reevaluate, resolve. That's it. The first thing you have got to understand is that in order to listen, you've got to be quiet. Okay? You cannot be having a shouting match with this person all the time. You've got to be quiet and just listen. It's the only way you're going to learn. Most of the time, the problem is not the problem. The problem is perspective and how people engage with that challenge based on how they're looking at it. So you've got to read the situation and listen first to what the other person has to say. Now, next you're going to have to respond. Okay? Now, your first response may not necessarily be the correct one, but you've got to respond. Okay? You cannot just be quiet on the situation. And that response cannot be to walk away, especially if the person bringing the conflict is at a 10 and you're like at a 2 or 0. Okay? Yes, when conflict comes, okay, usually we're caught off guard. We're not prepared for it. But you have to respond so that you can hear how the other person reacts. Sometimes you've got to sort of push buttons to test the water. Sometimes the other person is not ready to hear any sort of response, no matter what you say. And sometimes the response simply has to be, I can see that you're highly upset right now, and so it's going to be difficult for us to talk about this. But can we talk about this in an hour or perhaps this evening or later? And that's it. But you've got to come back to it whilst it's still fresh. Don't just leave it. If you don't resolve conflict immediately, what happens is that you create a vacuum, an empty space. And since nothing can exist in a vacuum, it doesn't have the capacity to create life, opportunity, growth, etc. Instead, you've created a perfect environment for something more destructive to grow and to be unleashed a lot later. By which time, your resolution that you have right now will not be enough. So let's not do that. Now, once you done reading and responding, your next task is to reevaluate. Now, as I always say, if you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. All right? And that applies to challenges, business, people, money, etc. So you've got to go in there and try and look at the situation again with a new perspective, especially now that you've had the other side of the story and you've had a time to listen to it, understand it, and you've also had a chance to respond. Granted, you've also seen how the other person reacts, so that should sort of give you insight into how they respond to certain things, and you'll know whether something is a yes or a hell no, both for you or for that other person. Finally, once you've reevaluated the situation together, okay, this is the operative word. You need to reevaluate it together. You cannot be the only one attacking the situation and the problem. You have to both attack the problem, okay? Otherwise, the other person doesn't grow, but you're the only one that's growing. So you need to do it together. You should be able to come up with a resolution that accommodates the needs of both of you. Even if you don't action it right now, you've got to put a date or time to when these measurable steps to a resolution are going to be put into action. You must put a date on it, okay? Don't just put a pin on it and be like, you know what, we don't have the ability to resolve the situation now, but now that we know what the resolution is, we can do it later. Put a date to it, put a time on it, okay? So that you can hold each other accountable. Accountability is usually what led to the problem in the first place, okay? A lack of accountability. So, again, don't just leave it unresolved, because that will create an environment for this to come up again. And both of you need to learn to take accountability. You know, to a large extent, the issue sits on your end. I'm just saying that if that's the case, take responsibility for that. However, both of you are usually at fault because the challenge wouldn't have turned into conflict if there wasn't a communication breakdown in the first place. And that's the truth. You've got to own that. So then what this means is that at some point you need to resolve your communication breaks as well. Make a note for that in the future. Resolving that usually resolves everything else. I can promise you that. And there you go, guys. That's my recipe for managing conflict. Now, I hope that this session has added value to you, and I hope you can apply it to your negotiation skills, in business, in finance, in managing people, or if you're finding challenges in your relationship and conflict just never gets resolved. Please apply this recipe, okay, to everything that you do, especially when it comes to conflict management. Okay, again, I'm going to give it to you. Read, respond, reevaluate, resolve. The 4 R's of conflict resolution management. So thank you very much for listening, guys. I'm Jody Kolbee, and this has been another session of What's Your Story? I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day, and remember to be the narrator of your own story.